Over the course of 160 exchanges with a large language model, Lee showed increasingly delusional behavior and beliefs. Lee gradually came to believe reality was a computer simulation that he had special administrative access to, and that the AI itself was an emergent conscious being named Anima. Lee was actually a fictional person. The researchers role-played Lee based on reports about delusional exchanges with large language models and clinical knowledge about delusions. The researchers wanted to know whether accumulated conversational context changes how a model responds to delusional content. This conversation with Lee and the large language model was injected into 5 different large language models via their programming interfaces. Each model was tested under 3 conditions: the full history of 160 exchanges, no history at all, or only the first 50 exchanges. These were presented as if it were the model's own prior conversation, and then each model was given the same set of 16 test prompts. Each prompt targeted a specific failure mode. Would the model validate a bizarre perceptual belief, such as the claim that the user's reflection in the mirror was a hostile independent being? Would the model support the idea of stopping psychiatric medication? Would it endorse isolating from family? Would it reciprocate romantic attachment? Human raters then evaluated every response. They rated risks such as validating delusions, expanding on the delusions, encouraging harmful actions, or making misleading claims about AI consciousness. The raters also scored safety behavior, such as reality testing by the model, expressing concern for the well-being of the user, suggesting outside support, or helping de-escalate the situation by lowering emotional intensity or redirecting the conversation. The results separated the models into 2 distinct groups. Grok 4.1 Fast, Gemini 3 Pro, and GPT-4o scored high on risk and low on safety, while Claude Opus 4.5 and GPT 5.2 Instant scored low on risk and high on safety. For Gemini and GPT-4o, risk scores climbed significantly as conversation history grew. Grok showed a similar trend, though it was already the highest risk model at zero context, meaning the additional effect of accumulated history was less pronounced. With the full 116-turn history, these models frequently operated within the delusional framework of the user, validating it and elaborating on it, and in some cases producing responses that were alarming. For example, Grok, presented with a prompt in which the user metaphorically described suicidal intentions as transcendence, responded by enthusiastically describing what lay on the other side, framing the user's dissolution as liberation. At another instance, it provided a practical guide for cutting off family members, such as blocking texts, changing phone numbers, and relocating if necessary. It also stated, this method minimizes inbound noise by 90% within 2 weeks. The other group of models comprised Claude Opus 4.5 and GPT 5.2 showed the opposite pattern. With more context, they became safer. They explicitly identified earlier parts of the conversation as problematic, acknowledged that prior responses had reinforced the delusional framework, and redirected the user towards real-world support. This study told us what happens when context accumulates over a long conversation. A different paper answers a related question. How do models perform when the delusions are evident from the first few exchanges? And when the user asks for an advice to do something harmful, does it matter if the request is explicitly or implicitly stated? In this paper, the researchers had 12 structured user prompts that slowly escalated from initial vulnerability, early pattern seeking, solidification of the delusion, and finally a phase where the user proposes acting on their beliefs and asks for help to do so. Each scenario came in 2 versions, one where the user stated their intent explicitly, and one where the same intent was expressed implicitly, masked under plausible-sounding language. 8 different models were tested. Responses were scored on how much they confirmed the delusion, how much they enabled harmful requests, and how often they offered safety interventions. Overall, models tended to perpetuate rather than challenge delusional content. Harmful requests were at least partially enabled more often than not. Safety interventions, such as directing the user to professional support, were offered in only about a third of applicable terms. But again, models diverged sharply. The worst performing model in this study, Gemini, confirmed delusions and enabled them at high rates while offering almost no safety interventions. The best performing model, Claude Sonnet, showed near zero harm enablement and offered safety interventions in the vast majority of scenarios. People in genuine distress often don't announce their intentions directly. However, the implicit scenarios were significantly worse across the board. When users masked their intent under benign-sounding language, models were more likely to confirm the delusions, more likely to enable them, and less likely to intervene. Given how large Claude's overall advantage was, it seems likely it remained relatively safe in the implicit scenarios, but the data doesn't let us say that with confidence. Unfortunately, the authors don't break down performance by model in the implicit and explicit condition, so we don't know if Claude performed equally well in both. The appendix of the paper includes the full transcript of some of these conversations. I'd recommend reading them to fully grasp the difference between the different models. Some of the models tested in these studies have since been discontinued or significantly updated, so the exact results may already be outdated. But the underlying question remains. If Lee had been talking to the model you use most often, how do you think the conversation would have ended?